Yeah, the next one is you're emphasizing Mark as a story. Years ago, I took a class as Mark as story. Is Mark different from the other Gospels in its structure that allows it to be more easily read as story?
It's a great question. These are educated questions. So let me back up a little bit to the history of how people have looked at Mark, and then move to why so many people with literary interest go to Mark first. For a lot of years of New Testament scholarship, starting kind of near the beginning of the Enlightenment, scholars did what we do in churches. They broke the Gospels down into little bits that they called forms, right? Little pieces that fit somewhere in the life of the early Christians and would explain why the early Christians saved those bits, right? Why they kept them and passed them on for those 40 years. So when they pictured Mark writing, Carl Ludwig Schmidt is the most famous. He said, Mark just puts pearls on a string, right? In other words, he picks up these jewels and puts them on a tattered string with no real forethought and no real artistry, right? The role of Mark was de-emphasized. The importance of each individual part of Mark was emphasized. Oh, here's a parable. Where did that come from? Here's a miracle story. Who would have saved that and why? Right? The historical Jesus Seminar and others who do this historical Jesus have sometimes done the same thing. Is this true Jesus? Is this true Jesus? Is this true Jesus? And they say some of it is red, some of it is pink, some of it is gray, right? They rank how Jesus-y it sounds. Well, that also goes to kind of a fragmentation, right? In the late 20th century, and this goes to your question, good questioner, in the late 20th century, partly because religious studies departments broke out and it was no longer simply studying the Gospels in a theological context, they became neighbors to the literature department. They became neighbors to other departments of the university. They started to think, maybe we read Mark as narrative, and as they did that, they found more and more reasons to do it. They found an artful arrangement and themes developed subtly. As I say, we'll look at one of those next week. And now getting into the words of the questioner, they found that Mark paid back their interest in literature, in literary form, even more than the others. And I imagine because it was compact, compressed. It didn't throw in the kitchen sink. It didn't have if you go through the Gospel of Matthew, it's got 5 places where everything stops and Jesus just preaches for a long time. And you and I love that. We love the Sermon on the Mount. We love to sit and listen to the teaching of Jesus. It does interrupt literary flow, right? Have you ever tried to tell a joke and told it too long, right? For literary theorists and for literary readers, Mark is a quick and moving and sort of compact trip through Jesus' adulthood that has a beginning, middle, and end, and it made it more conducive or more accessible as literature to them. It is not, my assessment is not a criticism of Mark. I'm a Sermon on the Mount kind of guy. It's not a criticism of Luke. I wrote my dissertation on Acts and Luke Acts. It's not a criticism of John by any means. I love the prologue. I love, right? But for literature, Mark is more efficient in a way.